You are listening to episode 159 of Mitolife Radio. I am Matt Blackburn, your host, and today I have returning to the show, Mandy Flanders, to talk about nervous system dysregulation, how to come back into balance. It's really important to have a basic understanding of our body's electrical system. I find that a lot of people that I speak with aren't in tune with it, and that leads to things like consuming coffee when you're burned out, which it can help restore your nervous system if used correctly with sugar. But if you can't tell that you're in a burned out state, then you're going to take actions that are going to further burn you out, like working out when you should be resting and not moving at all because your body's asking for that. So Mandy breaks down the different parts of the autonomic nervous system, the ventral vagus, the sympathetic, the dorsal vagus. She explains what the vagal brake is. She talks about coregulation, neuroception. We talk about guided meditation versus no sensory input meditation, subliminal messages, interoception. And then I ask her some questions from the audience, including how do you break out of a parasympathetic state? Is nervous system dysregulation responsible for insomnia and digestive issues? What are simple practices to ease back into our bodies after years of dissociating? Medical marijuana for anxiety leaves me more dysregulated. Thoughts on that? Thoughts on vibration technology. Is it possible to heal in the same space you were traumatized in? Best protocol for years of cocaine and ecstasy abuse. How to heal the vagus nerve. Best strategies to cope with an overactive nervous system from a traumatic brain injury. And possibly most important, where to start. So I love Mandy's energy. I love what she has to share, how easy she makes it to understand. So enjoy the show. Here is Mandy Flanders. All right, Mandy Flanders, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks so much for having me back on. It's so good to be here. Can't wait to share all about the nervous system with you and everybody listening.
Yeah, this is a fascinating topic, and I like interviewing people that know a lot about a topic that I know almost nothing about. And I know that the nervous system is interrelated with our physical health, and we're going to kind of talk about some of that, I think. But before we go into that, how did you get started in this work and life coaching and all this stuff?
Yeah, so I started out doing health coaching, and I was working with people who had cancer and autoimmune conditions, thyroid issues, chronic fatigue issues. And it was at the same time that I was kind of navigating my mold toxicity issues and dealing with a whole slew of symptoms. And so I was working with people and following, these really rigid detox protocols and limiting a lot of different foods and being very restrictive. And some of it would help, but then, I wasn't seeing the progress with them that I wanted to see. And so around that time, I had learned about the nervous system and trauma and how the nervous system can actually influence our immune state. And there's been a lot of research on it with the ACEs study. And the ACEs study is the Adverse Childhood Event Study. And so essentially, it was a Kaiser Permanente study, and they studied this weight loss group and found that people were having challenges with weight loss as a result of adverse childhood events. And so later they did more research and found that the more adverse childhood events that you had, the more likelihood of autoimmune conditions later in life. And so around that time, I started learning about nervous system regulation and dysregulation. And I was following these detox protocols alongside my clients. And when I started shifting toward nervous system work, that's when my immune health started to improve. And I was having way less pain, way less inflammation. My digestion was improving. And then the craziest part about it for me was with my kids. Not only was my health improving, but my kids' health started to improve too. And that's because of co-regulation, which we can go into a little bit more later on. But I was learning that the nervous system is really the foundational piece to our immune systems. And we have to have some element of safety within our systems in order to have an immune system that functions well.
Interesting. Yeah, I like the way you worded that element of safety, because there are so many things that could throw that off, like relationships, crappy home environment,
absolutely.
Noise pollution, EMF, so many things.
So many things. And relationships are really one of the biggest components because, and we'll dive into the nervous system now, we are relational beings, and our nervous system has three main components to it: the autonomic nervous system. So the autonomic nervous system, we have our ventral vagus, and we have the sympathetic nervous system and the dorsal vagus. So the ventral and the dorsal vagus are part of the vagus nerve, and it has two parts to it. So that's the parasympathetic branch. The sympathetic branch is the other part of the nervous system. So ventral just means forward. So that's like the front side of the vagus nerve. Dorsal means behind. Like if you think of a dorsal fin on a water mammal, dorsal is behind. So the ventral vagus, all of these, the vagus nerve is connected to all of our cranial nerves in our head, but it also connects to all the nerves throughout our body. So the nervous system is like this highway of fibers that are constantly communicating from brain to body, but also from body to brain. And 80% of information goes from body to brain, and only 20% of information goes from brain to body, which is just so mind-blowing to me. But so the nervous system is the ventral vagus. So the ventral is only mammals have this. And it's the social engagement system. It's how we connect with each other. It's how we relate to each other. It's safety. It's peace. It's ease. So when we're in our ventral vagal complex, we feel safe. We feel at ease. We feel comfortable in our skin. And Deb Dana kind of quantifies this as a ladder shape. So we'll move from our ventral vagal complex into the sympathetic nervous system, which is a state of self-protection. So a lot of people think of this as the fight and flight response, but it's so much more than fight and flight. It's our actual mobilization system. So when we are mobilized into the nervous system of the sympathetic nervous system, then we are taking action. This is where anger lives, frustration, anxiety, fear. So any of like those mobilizing a lot of energy sort of feelings. From there, if we are in that state of self-protection for a really long time, and we can't defend ourselves either by fleeing or fighting, our dorsal vagal complex will take over and we'll drop into dorsal, which is a state, it's our most intense place of self-protection. And it's where we are in this collapsed state. So we have low energy. We are just shut down. And you can even feel the heaviness, like listening to the tone of my voice, you can hear the change just even as I'm thinking about it. It's just a really heavy, low energy. Depression kind of lives here. It's a very heavy state, and it doesn't feel or look on the outside like anything really big is happening, but it's a state of energy conservation. And if you think about animals in the wild, when they play dead or play possum, they're in this state where their body is completely limp and flaccid because they are preparing themselves for the really horrible thing that's going to happen next, which is usually, being attacked by some predator or something. And so in this state, this is where we go when we leave our bodies, we dissociate, and we're just in this collapsed, hopeless state. Ventral, the state of joy, ease, peace, safety, connection, is where we want to, especially with trauma, it's where we want to build our capacity to be most of the time. It's not possible to be there all the time because life is life, and life will throw curveballs. Life will have all kinds of experiences. And so the goal is to have a flexible nervous system so that you can have enough safety to move into sympathetic or dorsal without being completely hijacked by it. And if you do get hijacked by the states, you know how to move back into ventral. So I'm hoping I painted a...
That was a really awesome
Okay,
breakdown.
good. I was going to say, I hope I painted a clear picture.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, that was amazing. Yeah, the book, I think you might have recommended it. Peter Levine, like Waking the Tiger, I think it was. Or one of the books that I've been reading on this area. It was really fascinating when they were talking about wild animals like gazelles or zebras getting torn apart in the wild by lions or hyenas or whatever. And that dorsal vagal state, that's like, God or whatever's protection, because you could look at that and say, wow, it's so brutal. They're getting their throat ripped open while they're alive, but they're in that dorsal vagal state where there's no pain, right? Like they quite literally like rape victims, right? They leave their body or whatever. And same with wild animals.
Yeah. And I'm actually glad you brought that up, because a lot of times people will have a really traumatic event that happens and they'll think, why didn't I fight back? Why didn't I do something? And the truth is your nervous system stepped in for you and decided for you. So we don't choose to move into these protective states. We're not thinking like, oh man, I think I'm going to move into my sympathetic state today because that feels really great. We move there because our nervous system senses a cue of danger, puts us into the state, and then acts on our behalf to protect us. So when we have an experience where we've been attacked or hurt in some way, our nervous system is stepping in to protect us so that we don't have to feel the really horrible thing that's going to happen next.
And the like about to be killed or raped, that's like an extreme example.
Right.
Would you say that a lot of people experience that day to day, just on a minor level, where
totally, if you have an angry
conversation,
you have a really angry boss that's yelling at you, or like you have a deadline coming up and you're like late for the deadline, you're going to be mobilized. And if you can't finish in time, you're typing and you're like so furiously trying to get this information out because you got to get it out to your boss. And then say you don't get it out in time, the next day your boss might chew you out. And for some people, that could be an experience that, causes them to drop into dorsal where they do dissociate because it's so painful for them.
Wow. Is that, I don't know if I'm way off base here, but when someone's like zoning out in conversation, I mean, I mostly just do this if someone tries to talk to me about sports because I don't care. Is that like leaving your body?
Well, so it could be. And dissociation has gotten such a bad rap with like therapy all over social media, right? And so a lot of people think, oh, dissociation is so terrible. It's so horrible. I don't want to be dissociated. But the truth is, dissociation is protection. We don't usually leave our bodies unless we have a good reason to do so. And sometimes a good enough reason to do that is just because we're tired. If you don't have a whole lot of energy, being really present in a conversation is going to be more taxing than if you do have a lot of energy. Or if you're trying to have a conversation that's really emotionally intense, then that's going to be more challenging to stay present, And so you might check out a little bit. And so part of this work is getting to know your nervous system and getting to know your inner limits and getting to know what your impulses are. Because maybe your impulse is asking you, your body's asking you to take a break, or maybe your body's asking you to change positions. And like listening to our impulses in this society is so frowned upon. Like think about kiddos in school where they're like fidgeting and trying to shift positions and they're wiggling, or they have to go to the bathroom and they're taught not to move. Like you have to stay really still. You can't move. Or like if we're in a meeting, like you can't do anything. You just have to hold it all in and be really, really stiff and rigid. And that's not how we're designed to be. We're designed to be, to have more movement and mobilization in our systems, but in a more fluid way.
That's awesome. And earlier you said we don't choose to move into these different states. Can you get to a point where you can consciously do it? Like with like changing your breathing or?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. So yes. Short answer is yes. There are different breathing techniques that you can do to slow your nervous system down. So if you're in a really mobilized state, then you can breathe out slowly. And this is where the vagal brake comes in. So the vagal brake is basically like our pacemaker. And when the vagal brake is on, we're going to be moving more slowly. And when the vagal brake is off or open, then we're going to have more energy in the system. And you can kind of toy around with your own vagal brake by imagining that it's open or imagining that it's closed. Or as you're breathing, imagining as you breathe in that it's opening and as you breathe out that it's closing. Because with every in-breath we take, our heart rate increases. And with every out breath that we take, our heart rate slows. So the slower that we breathe out, the slower we can make our nervous systems. And we can kind of switch our systems into a more parasympathetic state. One of the main things that I talk about.
I just got this.
Oh, no, that's all right.
Sorry, go ahead. There was a little delay.
That's okay. I was just going to say one of the main things that I talk about in my work is that change happens with practice. So if we want to really affect change or see change, we have to practice it. So practicing the slow breathing. And the hard thing is with people who have a lot of dysregulation in their nervous systems, they want to see massive change all at once. But the truth is that the change happens incrementally and slowly over time. And you have to kind of build on the foundation of that change over time with practice.
That makes sense. Have you experimented with heart rate variability? I think I might have asked you this in our first chat a year or two ago, but I recently just got a new like Russian machine, which you strap it to your wrists on each wrist, and it measures, I think, 200 beats. And it's pretty accurate. It's pretty amazing. And it'll graph out, it'll say your chakras, which I don't know how accurate that is, but it'll say that your biological age and
that's
how healthy you are, your cranial pressure, and it's like 10 pages.
Wow.
But do you think heart rate variability is a good tool to have? For people to play with?
I totally do. And heart rate variability is linked to the vagal brake. The best way to really be able to play with the vagal brake and to affect change in the vagal brake is we have to be in our ventral vagal system. We won't really be able to access it in the protective states. Because when you're in sympathetic, your vagal brake is fully open. So you have a lot of energy in your nervous system. You're very mobilized. And when you're in dorsal, you're in a state of hibernation, basically. You're like in a bear hibernating. And so there's not a whole lot happening. And so your vagal brake is closed and really tight. So you might notice, if you're a person that has had bouts of depression, you might notice that your body temperature is colder, your heart rate is slower. And that's because of that dorsal vagal complex that's kind of coming online to try to protect you. So I hope that answered the...
Do you have clients ask you, or... It did, yeah. Sorry, there's a few second delay. I was going to ask, like, do people ever ask you how to regulate their system when they can't leave a crappy environment? Because I get that question a lot. Like, I'm stuck with this person or this environment, and is it possible to heal and break out of this state without, completely shifting my life around? I think a lot of the time they have to shift their life around. That's been my experience, but I guess it's contextual.
Yeah, so that's a really good question and a really important question. It is definitely contextual. If you are in a really abusive relationship and you're trying to get better, then, you might have to consider the cost of being in that relationship. For some people, if you're in a moldy environment, then you might have to consider the cost of staying in that environment. You can overcome some stuff overcome and heal the nervous system in some capacity, but it might just take a lot longer if you're constantly being exposed to the threat. However, with that said, that doesn't mean that we have to avoid all threats to our nervous system all the time, because the goal isn't to be in ventral constantly. The goal is to have nervous system flexibility. We can't avoid every single stressor. It's just not possible because life is not that way. As much as we would like to live in like this utopia, on whatever commune you align with the most.
Avatar
yeah,
style.
Totally.
Yeah, it's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up. And I've noticed, like, places I've lived, like I started, my parents' house, and then I moved to like an RV, and then to a tiny cabin, and then to a bigger cabin. And I noticed, like, as my system got more regulated, it kind of went with my upgrades and environments to like cleaner environments. That's what I've observed in my own life.
Yeah, and our nervous systems are deeply affected by our environment and also deeply affected by the relationships that we have with people. So if we feel safe in a relationship, safe to be ourselves and safe to show up in a way that, however we are, then that's going to allow for a lot more nervous system flexibility, because you're not constantly in this protective state of either sympathetic, where you're defensive or angry or afraid, or you're not completely collapsed and shut down in a state of dorsal. And that's co-regulation. So co-regulation is really fascinating because we are relational beings. We have this ventral vagal nervous system where we connect with each other. And this is unique to mammals. All mammals have this. And so basically with co-regulation, it's where our nervous systems are offering each other feedback through our facial expressions, even the like tiny little micro facial movements of our eyes and around our mouth, especially, and through the tone of our voice. And so those things, our body posture, those things offer cues of safety or cues of danger to the nervous system. And so if I'm sitting in a room with a bunch of people and all of a sudden somebody just starts screaming, my nervous system is going to be perked up. Like, what the heck was that about? And maybe it was just like a lizard or something that went by and freaked somebody out. But if I'm walking into a room and people are really welcoming and they're wanting to, say hi and greet me in a comfortable way, then my nervous system is going to be responding to how their nervous system is responding. if I walk into a room and everybody's on their phone and no one's looking at me, that could either be a cue of safety to my nervous system or a cue of danger to my nervous system. And so how our nervous system interacts with our environment will depend a lot on our experiences that we've had in the past.
And I think you said you can co-regulate with animals, right? Like your pet dog or your cat, but it's not as strong as with the human. Is that true? Or
I think it would depend. I don't know that it's not as strong, because you can even co-regulate with a tree, which is just so amazing that we have this capacity. We can co-regulate with the sunshine, you know, and the brain is so amazing. Our limbic system doesn't really know time, and it doesn't know, like it can't discern time necessarily. So it doesn't know if something's happening in the past or in the present, which is why if you think of a stressful event, your body reacts as if the stressful event were happening in that moment. And so if we're having a stressful experience and maybe people are not safe to co-regulate with because maybe we've been hurt by a person or people in the past, so maybe an animal is safer for that person to co-regulate with. And so I often encourage people who have traumatic histories with other people to practice co-regulating with nature or with animals or with their pet first, because it will be safer and it can actually help build your capacity for co-regulation and being in connection with another person.
That's awesome. I think I can co-regulate with most of my animals except for my male goat. My buck, I think, stresses me out. He's always trying to attack me.
Maybe he thinks you're a threat to his women.
So a question that I thought of. So I know a lot of people stay in abusive relationships because they feel like their life is in danger if they're alone for whatever reason. But like you said, co-regulating with a tree or sunlight could often be healthier for those people, right? Because instead of just thinking they're going to be off floating on their own, they can regulate themselves without a partner.
Yes. And then I would also add that eventually they should experiment with taking a risk with co-regulating with another person, but it doesn't have to be a romantic partner. So it could be that you think about reaching out to a friend. So somebody that you know is going to be receptive to you, even if you're not talking about anything, you know, in particular, just thinking about texting someone or thinking about calling someone, and then working your way up from a more passive co-regulation tool to a more active co-regulation tool where you actually do reach out to the person or you do go to lunch with the person. It doesn't have to be like a romantic partner. It can be a friend or it can be a store clerk, you know, it's just somebody that feels supportive to your nervous system.
That makes sense. Yeah, it's interesting in my situation because I'm pretty far from the city and I still see humans every couple days or so being way out here. But I'm curious, Mandy, if you've had friends or known people that are pretty okay on their own, because you said we're communal beings, you know, we have the ventral vagal thing going on as mammals, but is it a context thing with how, you know, how long someone could be alone, you know, just in a cabin in the woods for weeks? Like, even though we're communal beings. I don't know if that question makes sense, but
I think it does. And there's like, I feel like there's movies about this, about the guy or the person who lives on their own. And I'm thinking about, I wonder how those end in the movies. I mean, movies are obviously not a real.
Well, there's a lot.
It's not a depiction of real life, but
yeah, you've seen like the space movies, right? Like astronaut movies are fascinating to me because that's like the most extreme disconnection, like you're off
Oh,
world,
yeah.
like, and there's so many of those being pumped out at us for some
Hmm.
reason. But
I
yeah.
mean, from a nervous system perspective, we are not really meant to be in isolation. That's why in jail, I forget what it's called when they put people in isolation as a punishment.
Oh,
Yeah, solitary
solitary.
confinement. Thank you. When they punish the prisoners in solitary confinement, that's like one of the worst forms of punishment because then they're alone.
Yeah. Yeah. When I used to work at juvenile hall, I felt so bad because it seems so cruel when the kids were bad. They would just lock them in there for the whole day or the rest of the day or whatever alone. And
Totally.
like, that's rough.
It is. And that's why, and that brings up a good point with our kids, because a lot of people don't know how to discipline their children. And so they'll put their children in timeout when they're misbehaving. But really, if you apply the nervous system to children's behaviors too, you can see that a child that's acting out is probably in a sympathetic state and they're in an active state of self-protection. So if you send a child who is afraid or angry to go be by themselves, then because it's the flight response is just fear and the fight response is anger. So if you're sending your child to go and be by themselves, they're not going to know how to process it because that's a lot of energy in their nervous system. And what ends up happening is they don't know how to process it. And a lot of times they will collapse and drop into that dorsal vagal complex because they don't know how to process it. Their nervous system says, this is so overwhelming, we're going to die. We have to get this under control. And then they just drop into that collapsed state, which a lot of parents will sometimes I know, and sometimes parents will mistake that as, oh, my child is now complying and my child is now better in a better mood or whatever, but they're not necessarily. They might be just in a deeper state of survival.
Wow. Maybe that's why it turned out okay, because my parents would put me in timeout by the front door. By the front door, we'd line up all our shoes. And when I would be there in timeout, I would pick up the shoes and throw them across the room. I guess that was my way of getting the energy out.
Perfect. Yeah, I mean, that's great. And so one suggestion for parents, because I'm sure people are going to be saying, well, what else do I do with my kid when they're in that state? You know, if your child is acting out, I always invite my kids to have a time in, which for me is, okay, we're going to sit here or let's take a walk together and get rid of some of this energy. Let's go in the backyard and, you know, jump around. Let's go on the swings. Let's go do something where we can connect and co-regulate because my nervous system is regulated, but also a way that offers you some way to move this energy out of your system so that it's not just continually circulating inside. The bigger challenge for parents is that they don't know how to regulate their own dysregulation, and their kids being in a sympathetic state or a dorsal state is often very activating for the parent, and they don't know how to deal with their own activation that is being stirred up in their nervous system.
It's like triggering.
Yeah, exactly.
Accurate
It
term.
is. And it triggers a protective response because if your child is in a fight state, that might activate your fight state. Because if your little kid is saying, I hate you, you're the worst mommy ever, you know, or the worst daddy ever, then that's going to activate your fight state if you are not able to see this through the lens of the polyvagal theory. And then you're going to be like, I am not, you know, that, or you may not say that, but you might be feeling that, like, how dare you say that to me? But the kid just, all they're saying is, I feel uncomfortable. I want to feel better. And I don't know how to feel better. Will you please help me? Is basically what they're trying to say.
Have you found, like, in your research, like the cleaner the child's nutrition and environment, the better they act? Because I've looked into like how heavy metals can cause behavioral issues, and do you think that plays a large role or just a piece?
I honestly think it depends, because if it's meticulously clean, then that might create more anxiety in a kid's nervous system and more dysregulation in a kid's nervous system, because then they feel like they can't, there's no freedom to be messy. Kids are naturally sensory, and messy. And like my kids are outside in the dirt constantly. And like my daughter will make mud pies, but then like makes mud pies all over herself. She gives herself mud baths, and like probably a lot of your listeners are not, they're like letting their kids play in the dirt and stuff, but it just depends on the type of cleanliness. Like kiddos need structure and boundaries, because that resistance is what helps kids grow, but it also helps kids to know, like, where's my limit? Where do you end and where do I begin? And so if there's no limits, then kids kind of feel lost, like they're floating. But if the limits are too rigid and too tight, then the kids don't feel like they have any room to breathe. Does that help?
It does. Yeah. My friend Benny was over here, and he has a young child, and he was saying he touched the hot part of a wood stove, like the handle part or something. And now he knows, like, whenever he, there's like a fire, he'll put his hand like out and he'll say just like hot or something.
Yeah.
And you only need to be burned once, but Benny let him touch it. He saw it was going to happen, and it happened. And now he learned his lesson. And now he has that boundary with
yeah. And that actually raises such a good point about natural consequences. And so often parents will feel like they have to, help their kids or protect their kids. But really what kids need to be able to learn is natural consequences. And that doesn't mean that like you should let your kids be completely reckless. There need to be some limits within that. But like if your child isn't doing their homework, that's not the time for you to go in and do their homework for them so that they don't fail. They need to experience the responsibility of what that is. And that's how personal responsibility is developed, is when we say, okay, this is your choice. If you're not going to do your homework, then, you're not going to get the good grade that you want in your class or whatever. And if you don't get good grades, then you're not going to get this privilege. And so there's kind of a domino effect of the natural consequences when kiddos make those choices for themselves. Or like kids.
Yeah. And there's like, sorry,
I was just going to say kid, like room cleaning. That's such a huge one for parents. Parents want their kids to clean their dang rooms. And if they don't clean their rooms, then it's so easy for the parent. We could get it clean in 4 seconds, like we know where all the toys go. We know where the bins are. Like we'll just throw everything in it. But we're really robbing our child of the experience of learning how to do it, proving that they can go through hard things and that they can get through it onto the other side, and proving to themselves like, oh, I'm actually capable of this. Yes, this feels completely consuming and overwhelming to my system, and I can still do it.
Yeah, and it puts them to work, right? That's what I think children are for. No, I'm just kidding. No, I'm just kidding. Work the farm.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Which is where I wonder, like, going to this Elon Musk world of like artificial intelligence. I just saw a video of like a fully autonomous, I don't think it was CGI. It was like a bot that was waking up in a room, and a guy was in the background of the computer, and it was super aware, and it was looking around. I'm like, our future is going to be weird.
That is...
like, because we're not necessarily going to need children to work our property. You could just have droids, like C-3PO type deal, just cruising around doing your stuff.
That is so bizarre. It is such a weird world. Like, I was thinking about it when, we're in the car, even my kids will be like, Mom, can you play this song? But when I was a kid, we didn't have the luxury of getting to choose the songs. It was like whatever was playing on the radio was what we got to listen to. And my kids are like, no, just play the song that I like to listen to, put it on right now. And I'm like, wow, you guys have no idea what it's like to have to, sit in the discomfort of listening a song that you hate listening to.
Yeah, it's like life's becoming easier and easier in a way, right? Like It's like the movie Wall-E or something.
Totally. And I don't know that that's necessarily a good thing for our nervous systems, because we need some level of stress. Healthy stress is what it's called, so that we can stretch our nervous systems without actually stressing our nervous systems. It's so important to have some level of stress in our lives, not like this chronic stress that we have in our society, where our threats have changed from like a lion chasing us in the wild, or not having food for months and months until we get our next kill, but now it's like these deadlines, and it's like other forms of survival stress. And so in a way, things are getting easier, but also our nervous systems are becoming less able to tolerate discomfort. And so we have a lot of like really, fragile nervous systems in a way that can't really handle a lot of life's daily and normal stressors.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think people just need to keep farm animals and live in the snow. I think it was the first week I got here. My buck jumped his gate. There was just a wall of snow. He just jumped right over it. He was just humping my doe.
Oh my gosh.
I didn't want to be humped all morning. And so that was a pretty good stressor for me. And I'm like, I'm good for a month. Trying to get him back in.
That's so crazy. Farm life is so fascinating to me. It really is. It is such a cool way of existing. It gives you a much broader appreciation for a lot of different things, I think, because you get to see, that, oh yeah, like I have to actually work for this milk that I have, and I have to work a little bit for this other thing. Like you appreciate things more rather than like, oh yeah, I just get whatever I want at my fingertips because I have the money for it or whatever.
Right. Yeah. And I think the energy that you get from it, getting a little esoteric, but I have all these devices going here and focused life force energy and wild stuff. And it's like, I feel like that going into the milk or the eggs makes a huge difference. I'm like recycling the energy.
Yeah. And I think
my environment I'm consuming.
Totally. And I think too, the energy of our love and appreciation going into that as well, like your animals are experiencing that from you, from your nervous system. So even like, yes, I believe in energy in that way too, but also the energy of our co-regulation. So like you have calmer animals, and so they're going to produce better, their meat or their eggs or their milk is going to be better quality when they're calmer and happier rather than when they're stressed.
Do you think we co-regulate, like you mentioned, facial eye movements and little micro expressions, but do you think we also co-regulate through our biofield?
That's a good question.
Like biofields interacting?
I think so, because like when I think about my kids, even if I'm not outwardly emoting or projecting that I'm off, they sense it and they pick it up. Now, I don't know if that's because of the nervous system, and this nervous system is literally an expert at detecting the most subtle of changes, from the way that we walk, from the way that like our eyebrows move, the stuff that we are not conscious and aware of. The nervous system is constantly detecting that through neuroception. And neuroception is the nervous system's perception. That's why when you get on the phone with somebody, you don't even have to see their face. All you hear is the tone of their voice, and you can sense something's up. And then you might be able to energetically feel too, but you can hear it through the tone of their voice as well. And that's because our nervous system, the vagus nerve, is connected to our vocal cords as well. And so we have vocal prosody, which can offer cues of danger or cues of safety. So a high-pitched shriek, if you hear a baby screaming, think about a baby screaming and just notice what happens in your nervous system as you think about that. For me, it's like an immediate jolt of like, oh shoot, I got to go see what's up with my babies. And then think about being, for me, this is a total cue of safety, and it may not be for everybody, but thinking about being on a beach by yourself. Maybe there's like a swing hanging from a palm tree or some kind of a sea grape tree. The sun is shining, there's seagulls out, and just noticing as I'm describing this scene, the waves are really calm, washing in and out from the shore, and just sensing how, for me, that just feels so regulating and nourishing, and immediately is like, oh, that feels really good to my system to think about that. So we have these cues of safety and cues of danger. For some of us, they will be different, kind of like what I mentioned earlier, where if I walk into a room and everybody's on their phone, for one person, that could be a cue of safety because it's like, oh God, thank goodness I'm not going to be seen. But for another person, that could be a cue of danger because they feel invisible and they want so desperately to be seen. And so we have this neuroceptive system. And so I do think, yes, we have an energetic field that we interact with as well. That's why you can think about somebody and then they'll call you the next day, like I definitely believe that. But I also think that our nervous system plays a part in that too. But I'm just not sure how much of which plays the bigger part. But we are definitely energetic beings. Yeah. I totally believe that.
Yeah, I think Rupert Sheldrake, I still have to start the book, but it was like how your dog knows when you're coming home or something like that. Adam Berkson recommended that. And I still have to bust it open. But Rupert, I think he was kicked off TED Talks.
Oh, wow.
The questioning science or something.
Oh, dear. Yeah.
So the neuroception thing, is that why I feel good when one of my cats like lays on my chest and purrs? Is that the same thing?
That could be part of it. And also the co-regulation aspect too. And so seeing your cat, like say you're laying in your bed and all of a sudden you see your cat start to walk over, seeing your cat walk over could be a cue of safety because it's like, oh, my cat's coming to snuggle with me. And then your cat gets on your chest. And so yes, having the cat on your chest is a cue of safety, but it's also co-regulating. So you can feel the cat's fur, the smoothness of your cat as you're petting the cat down the back, from the head down to the back, and you can feel how soft that fur is. And you can feel the purr, vibrating on your chest. And so that's a little bit of like a vagus nerve toning too, that vibration, but also just the warmth and the weight of the cat will offer a co-regulating and neuroception of safety to your system. That's why weighted blankets are so powerful.
Awesome. Yeah, I just saw a company came out with an EMF shielded one, which is kind of cool. I've played with them over the years.
That's interesting. I want to see that.
Last thing on the cat thing, I think we're going to discover a lot more about the cat's purr. Like I've been diving into scalar energy.
Oh, yeah.
I just learned there's like an electric side which Tesla tapped into, and a magnetic side of scalar energy. I bet they're like emitting scalar energy too. There's probably so much going on we don't know.
That's amazing. Well, I mean, in Egypt, cats were like considered so sacred, right?
Yeah. Probably like little tuning forks or something.
Yeah. I've heard that the cat's purr is the frequency to heal bones.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how true that is, but I remember hearing that a while ago.
I think it's true. Yeah. Someday I want to get I have all these other meters. I'm sure there's one you could measure the hertz emitting, pointed at something. And as soon as I get that, I'll post my findings.
Yeah, please do. I want to see that. That's super fascinating.
So I was wondering, Mandy, I've been into sensory deprivation flotation therapy for the last couple of years. I think on the clinical side, it's called REST therapy. Like I forget what that acronym stands for, but I've had some pretty trippy experiences in there, and I'm sure they'll become trippier as I float more. Like we were talking about before we started recording, like out of body experiences. And there have been a lot of times, like if you've ever floated, you're probably familiar with that feeling of anxiety that comes up. Like it's like a restlessness with almost like a panic combination. And
Mm-hmm.
I've experienced that numerous times in the flotation tank. And what I noticed is that if I don't, turn on the light and end the session, if I just stay through it for even 5 minutes, I break through to a really deep relaxation state. So my question for you is that a sign of a semi-functioning nervous system that I can do that? Because I'd imagine some people can't make that switch, right? They just stay in that panic kind of state.
So that's a good question, an interesting question. So that panic would be your sympathetic nervous system that's coming online because it's sensing, there's a neuroception of danger or life threat. And the deep relaxation, depending on your nervous system, it could be possibly, and maybe not for you, but for some people, there could be a bit of a dissociation as the dorsal vagal complex kicks online. And so that actually brings a good point up of the blended states. So we have 3 blended states. There's the state of play, our freeze state, and then the state of stillness. So when we're in a state of stillness, it's a blend of ventral vagal and dorsal vagal. So you've got the 2 of those online where your body feels safe enough to be in that stillness. And a lot of times we'll have that online, like nursing moms will, because you have to be in a state of stillness to be restful, to be able to be calm with your baby, in a state of meditation. And so that deep relaxation could be a state of stillness that you enter as you shifted through that mobilization of the sympathetic nervous system. For some nervous systems, it could lead to a dorsal collapse where they end up dissociating. And so meditation for some nervous systems could be not so helpful because the nervous system might perceive that stillness as threatening. And so instead of it bringing on cues of safety, it could bring on cues of danger or life threat. And so the difference between danger and life threat, danger would activate the mobilization response, that sympathetic nervous system, where life threat would activate the dorsal vagal response, which is, I'm going to die. I have to prepare for death. So I'm going to disconnect from this experience so I don't have to feel the really horrible thing that's going to happen next. And if you are a person that meditates, not you specifically, Matt, but any of your listeners that are listening to this, and meditation is either really tricky for you or you tend to leave your body a lot in those meditative states, then I would encourage that person to be very present with their experience of meditation. So present with the breath and feeling the breath, present with the sensations, because that keeps you grounded in the present moment. But for someone who is mobilized and trying to meditate and feeling super duper restless, then they may benefit from more of like a moving meditation. And so I know that's kind of off the topic of what you originally asked, but it got me thinking about the blended states and how meditation can be helpful for some people, but not so helpful for others.
No, I'm really glad you went that direction, because the last year or so I've been playing with what you could call guided meditations. Like, there's tons of like apps and websites. I've been really enjoying New Calm. I think nothing's made me feel the same way as that thing. And that, or the Lucia light, like the flashing lights with your eyes shut above your face. Or even in my float tank, you could pump, you can connect really relaxing, whatever brain entrainment things into the water. Most float tanks have that capability. And I feel like some people think that's like a waste or you're not going deep enough. But I think that's fascinating that you said the nervous system could perceive stillness as threatening. So in that situation with those people, these quote guided meditations with sound or lights could be more beneficial than no stimulation at all, right?
Totally. And going deep enough is very relative to that nervous system, because some nervous systems may not be ready to go deep into something. Because that stillness, when we're still, that's when our stuff wants to come up to the surface. That's when we might be more aware of the discomfort in our bodies or the nervous thoughts. And we'll get into thought work in a minute. And the racing mind and the racing heart and the discomfort in our sensations, physical pain, stuff like that tends to surface when we're still. And for some nervous systems, it is really uncomfortable to have to be with those experiences if you're not used to doing that. And so part of healing is building our capacity to handle the uncomfortable experiences inside, because we want to have more capacity to stretch our nervous systems rather than stress our nervous systems, so that the everyday stressors of life don't exacerbate us. And when we have more safety and regulation in our nervous systems, that's when we can go deeper into those more still states where you can be present and not dissociate in those experiences, and where you can be present and not be activated in those still experiences. Did that make sense? Did I explain that well?
Yeah, that was great.
Okay,
And would you say it takes energy too to, as you said, quote, stretch your nervous system? Like that takes energy to kind of evolve that, right?
Totally. And it takes repetition. It's a constant repetition of practicing regulation tools, but also leaning into the discomfort of maybe co-regulation with a person, if that's something that we're not accustomed to, or leaning into self-regulation on our own, if that's not something that we're accustomed to. Because for some nervous systems, co-regulation may come very easily, and all you would rather do is co-regulate and be with other people. But for that nervous system, it may be really challenging to self-regulate. And so you kind of want to lean into a little bit within your toleration of the discomfort of that, so that of the opposite one, that the one that doesn't come as naturally to you, so that you can begin to stretch the nervous system rather than stress it. But it's also a practice of learning how to feel okay with the good feelings, because for somebody that's experienced trauma, feeling good may be really scary. For someone that's experienced trauma, when things are going good in their life, they're waiting for the other shoe to drop. They're thinking all hell is about to break loose. I don't trust this even one bit, or like if you're in a relationship with somebody and it's going really well, then all of a sudden you're like, holy shit, I can't do this. This is too much. It's too overwhelming. It's like a light switch where our nervous system says, oh, wait, I'm getting too close to this person. I need to pull away. I can't have too much of a good thing, because I remember not in my system, but that person's system may remember a time where things were good and then they lost the good thing. And our nervous systems remember all of the bad things that have happened to us, and we have a built-in negativity bias. So what this nervous system healing work is about rewiring and reshaping the brain, so that instead of having the built-in negativity bias, we then can lean more toward the built-in positivity bias. And the reason we have a built-in negativity bias is not because there's something wrong with us, but it's because we are geared toward survival, because our nervous systems want to keep us alive. So imagining if we're hiking in the woods and we go to pick up a walking stick, but that stick is a snake, you might see the snake and throw it and run, right? So your nervous system, the next time you're walking in the woods, you're going to be way more cautious about the sticks that you pick up, because your system remembers, oh, that thing was kind of dangerous the last time. I better not do that. And we don't have that same wiring toward the positive, because the positive doesn't usually hurt us. And so
That's
it's
fascinating.
designed.
Sorry.
No,
It's delay.
I know, it's okay.
I was just gonna say, I played a lot with subliminal messages. Like probably the wildest little experiment I've ever done was I did ultrasonic transducers on my forehead every night for like 6 months straight with an
Wow.
iPod, beaming subliminal messages through my bone into my brain.
Wow.
And it worked. I mean, it definitely rewired my brain. I did like, scarcity consciousness because I hated money back then and thought it was evil. And I did just different programs, and it literally did rewire my beliefs. And so, you mentioned thought work, how to change your thoughts. I'm sure there's a lot of ways to do it. And I guess the way I did it is kind of a technological way, right?
Yeah, that's super interesting. I don't honestly know anything about it, so I would have to look into that. But I wouldn't be surprised, because we are energetic beings as well. And it's energy. That's what it is. And so with thought work is really interesting because most of our thoughts are not helpful. Most of our thoughts and narratives and beliefs are not like encouraging or supportive. A lot of them are like really harsh and critical. And so many of us think like, oh, I would just be so much better if I didn't have any thoughts, but the thoughts are there because they are a reflection of our nervous system state. So our story, Deb Dana teaches, and she is the clinician that brought the polyvagal theory into clinical practice. And so Deb Dana teaches that your story follows your state. So the story being the thoughts that you have that will follow your state. So imagine that you are in a dorsal vagal state. You're heavy, you're hopeless, you're listless, lethargic. And you've got like this Snapchat filter or an Instagram filter over your face, and you're seeing everything through this filter of dorsal vagal. The world is going to be pretty bleak and hollow and empty and hopeless. And why bother? What's the point? So your thoughts are going to reflect that state that you're in. And if you're in a sympathetic state, your thoughts are going to reflect this. I have to get it done. I have to do this. I have to take charge. I have to take action. And like, why doesn't anyone help me? It's going to be like this defensive, frustrated, or maybe even scared. Like, oh my gosh, this is too much. I can't do this. And then when we're in our ventral vagal complex, that's going to be the state where we're feeling and thinking, oh man, everything is just full of possibility. I can do pretty much anything I want. I can go to bed when I want. I can wake up when I want. I'm choosing to do this. These things are not happening to me. I'm in control of myself. I'm in control of my being, kind of a thing. And in order to change the thoughts that we have to work at our state level to really affect change. So shifting the nervous system state that we're in will then begin to shift the thoughts that we're having. This is also why a lot of times affirmations don't work for a lot of people, because you can't think yourself into feeling better. Because if we could, we would just do that. It's like if you're in a stressed out state and somebody tells you, oh, just relax. That like never, ever helps someone to feel more relaxed. In fact, if somebody tells me to just relax, I usually feel less relaxed and I'm even more anxious. Like, oh my God, now this person doesn't understand me and I'm crazy. Like what is happening? So if we want to really affect change in the way that we're thinking, we have to change the way that our physiology is experiencing that moment. So the way that we do that, some of the ways that we do that is if we're in a dorsal state, it's the state of immobilization. So we have to begin by allowing ourselves to mobilize. And that might look like we start with a really passive thing. So for some people wake up in the morning and feel like, oh, another day. I don't want to get out of bed. I don't want to do this. I have so much responsibility. I really just am not in the mood today. So in those mornings, if, you wake up feeling like that heavy dorsal kind of state, allow yourself to think, okay, I don't have to get up in this moment, but what would it look like if I did start to move? Maybe I'll stretch my body, and you could just allow gentle mobilization. Or if that feels like too much, just maybe turning your head from side to side, nice and slow, or wiggling your fingers. It sounds so silly because it sounds so like, really, that's it. But the nervous system doesn't need these massive things to happen. It doesn't need some like fireworks. It just needs a little bit of a nudge in order to affect some change. Now, if you are in a mobilized state and you're feeling completely busy and can't sit still and like overwhelmed in your body, then I might encourage you to do something to discharge that energy. So maybe that means going and taking a walk, or folding laundry, or brushing your teeth, doing something that you can be really present with, allowing yourself to discharge that energy, calling a friend. Sometimes, that co-regulation piece can be really helpful. So things like that to help. And we're not looking for monumental shifts. We're looking for teeny tiny little steps so that you can see in your system, okay, this is how I'm feeling. I'm feeling really heavy, or I'm feeling really busy and really overwhelmed. What's one tiny little thing that I can do to bring in a bit more regulation to my system? And so offering ourselves little tools like that, little engagements, either with ourselves or with another person, can help bring more regulation into the system. And what really affects the change is our awareness of it. If we're doing these things mindlessly and we're not paying attention, then we're not going to notice the changes that are happening. And that is what is the biggest piece, is noticing, oh, I brushed my teeth and that did help calm me down. Being really present with the mint flavor of my toothpaste and the vibration of my electronic toothbrush, or whatever toothbrush you have, and the cold water on my face, that really did actually help to kind of discharge some energy. I do feel a little bit more present in my system. I do feel like I can go handle the day with my kids now.
That's awesome. It's funny. It's a good segue. One of the Q&A questions a listener sent in is, if I'm stuck in a parasympathetic state, are things like the sauna and exercise needed to break out of that parasympathetic state?
So that's a good question. It would depend if your parasympathetic state has any ventral vagal in it. If it feels like a safe parasympathetic state, then you may not need to do anything except find more things that help you to feel more regulated. If it's that collapsed parasympathetic state of immobilization, then it may be helpful, sauna can help, but really the biggest thing is to do things that feel supportive to your nervous system and that help support your body in making those changes. That's things that allow you to be present and that are within your toleration, essentially.
Awesome. Is the nervous system dysregulation responsible for insomnia and digestive issues?
Yeah. So one of my teachers says that he's never seen a person who has trauma or nervous system dysregulation not have digestive issues. And digestive issues, because of the nervous system, digestive issues are deeply affected and deeply connected by the nervous system. And that's because of all the nerves and the nerve fibers that go down to our digestive tract. And the vagus nerve itself is deeply connected to digestion. And so when we are in an active state of self-protection, our digestive system essentially turns off, because our system is sending the energy. So in a sympathetic state, it's sending the energy that we would use for digestion into the mobilizing limbs of the body. So like our legs and our arms, so that we can run or fight. And if we're in a dorsal vagal state, it's conserving energy across the whole body. So your digestion is going to be so slow and so shut down. And then with insomnia, that's more going to be a sympathetic nervous system where you have a lot of energy in the system, and sleeping is going to be a bit more challenging, because if you think about it, if your nervous system thinks that it's running from a bear, or there's like some, threat that it has to escape, you're not going to be able to fall asleep. So the way to affect those is to, again, attempt to discharge some of that energy in a way that feels within toleration. And for some of us, discharging the energy may feel like too much, and maybe trying to find ways to just lay and just be and do nothing is actually better. So getting like a weighted blanket or co-regulating with a pet or even a loved one could be so helpful.
That's great. Yeah, I tend to tell people about the devices. I'm like, Sota Biotuner and Fisher Wallace, Circadia, and the electrostimulation can help, but it probably is a Band-Aid somewhat, whereas getting to the root is definitely a priority.
Totally. And it may not be so much a Band-Aid, but it's a tool. And like you said, getting to the root is so critical if you want to have that lasting change. Mm-hmm. And I believe in what I'm learning.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, it's okay. I was just going to say, I believe in I'm learning that the nervous system really is at the root of so many of our physical issues.
Mm-hmm. It makes total sense. Yeah. Let me see. It distracted me on my little pop filter here. There was a box elder bug. Some of the listeners might be familiar, but they're kind of creepy. When you crush them, they smell like sweet or something, and they're
weird.
They're all over now. I was crawling on my mic.
That's so funny. Maybe he had some input.
I silenced him. Yeah.
You were. Oh my God! Why can't I think of that word? When they censoring. Jeez.
Oh, right. In my last interview, it actually flew in my coffee cup, so they're not being nice.
That's terrible.
Yeah, when you live in the mountains, you get used to more critters, of all kinds. So
that's how I feel about being in the swamp here.
Yeah. You get used to it. This is a good one. What are some simple daily practices to ease back into our bodies after years of dissociating?
So the first thing that comes to mind is honestly just the practice of like feeling your own skin, and like touching with one hand, touching your hand and just looking at your hand and saying, this is my hand. And just noticing your hand, and then, touching your forearm. And it sounds so silly, but for those of us who've experienced really severe dissociation, your body doesn't feel like your body. And so really giving yourself a few moments, it doesn't even have to be like an hour-long practice or anything, but just like a couple of moments where you're noticing, oh, this is my hand. These are my fingers. These hands cut my food. When I'm cooking, these hands pour my water. These hands drive the car. This is amazing. And just offering appreciation for your hands. And you can do that with every part of your body. This is my face. Even massaging your face can actually activate the social engagement system, and doing it with presence, noticing as you're touching your face and touching your head, how does this feel to my head? How does this feel to my face? And noticing as you're doing it, Oh, it feels okay to my face. It feels okay to my head. That's interesting. And then noticing, how does it feel to my hands as I'm doing that? Do my hands like the feeling of my face and of my head? And you might be interested and curious about the answers that you get, because sometimes I'll be doing something and I'm like, oh yeah, my one hand likes this, but my other arm that I'm doing it to doesn't like it. That's really interesting. And just noticing and tracking and taking inventory, not to change it or make meaning out of it, because that's what we do as meaning making beings. We'll feel something and think, oh my gosh, this means, whatever it means. But the meaning doesn't really matter as much as how you are experiencing it.
And you probably want to do that on your own, because if you do it in public, people will think you're on magic mushrooms or something.
I mean, you could, or if you're feeling really adventurous, you may want to do it in public. And maybe you could co-regulate by offering to the person that you're with, to the store clerk or whatever, hey, that's your hand.
Be a good coffee shop conversation starter. Yeah.
Totally.
This is a good one. 1-to-1, I guess they mean THC to CBD, medical marijuana for anxiety, leaves me feeling more dysregulated. Why is that, and how to fix that?
So this could be for a couple of different reasons, and that's a good question. It could be strain dependent. So some strains will affect our nervous systems differently depending on the different components of the plant that you're taking in. But it could also depend on the state that you're in. And so if you're in a dorsal state and you're taking in a THC strain that doesn't really resonate with the dorsal state, then it could put you into a sympathetic state. And if your heart beats a little bit faster, which sometimes it can with cannabis, or it can beat slower, noticing that can activate. So we have another perception in our nervous system called interoception. So we have neuroception, but we have interoception, and that's our perception, our nervous system's perception of what's happening inside of our body. And so you could interocept, these feelings as a threat. So if you notice your heart rate is elevated after you smoke, that could signal a cue of danger to your system, leaving you feeling a little bit more dysregulated. Or for some people, smoking can leave them with a sense of more acute awareness of their physical symptoms and sensations, which can also feel like a cue of danger or a life threat to some nervous systems. And so just noticing, this may not be the substance for you right now. That doesn't mean that it's never going to be, but for maybe right now, it may not be a supportive substance for you. And there's so many other herbs that are nourishing and supportive to the nervous system. CBD is generally pretty benign and can be supportive to the nervous system. Passion flower is kind of a go-to because it's safe for babies, it's safe for nursing moms, it's safe for pregnancy, it's safe for pretty much everybody, and it's really supportive to the nervous system. Skullcap is another one that they say helps the nervous system. It actually helps with a racing mind. So skullcap can be one for those who have racing thoughts and racing minds.
That's cool. Yeah, I played around with some sleep formulas the last few years, just Gaia herbs or whatever, from the health food store, the sleep capsules and a blend of 5 or 6 herbs. And I think I noticed that valerian, that herb valerian gives me nightmares. So you have to play with some of them. I don't know if that's a unique, different from passion flower and all the others, but yeah. That one didn't work for me.
Yeah, well, valerian, interestingly enough, it's one of the most well-known ones for sleep, but it's I actually don't recommend it to everybody because it can put you into a deeper sleep and kind of like what you're saying, some people will have more nightmares on it and stuff. But it can also, it's really interesting because it can put you into a deeper sleep, but it can interrupt your sleep cycles because you're in a deeper sleep for maybe a longer period of time than what your system is used to. So passion flower is a nervine in a way that it offers support to the nervous system and is more calming to the system rather than like a more sedative herb like valerian or hops.
That's awesome. This is a really interesting one. Thoughts on vibration technology for the nervous system? Apollo or Tune Studio. I don't know if you've looked into some of those. Like they have like a wrist little device that vibrates, and you could choose, relax and unwind, or meditate, or wake up, and it vibrates. Essentially, it's affecting your touch center. But I know there's things like these cropping up. I don't know if you've looked into any of that.
I actually I've heard of Sensate. I think I talked to you about that once a while ago. And I haven't experimented with any of them personally, but I've heard from some people that they really like them. I honestly use just my own hands, just like safe self-touch where I'm just being present with the sensations that I'm feeling. I think that kind of like what you said earlier, sometimes using these devices can be another way to distract ourselves in hopes of finding, a cure for our dysregulation, when really what we need is to just be more present. And that's the hardest part, is to practice being present with the discomfort that we're feeling. And we have to do it in a slow and titrated way so that we don't overwhelm our nervous systems, because the reason we dissociate either by being in a sympathetic state or dissociate into a dorsal vagal state is because what we're experiencing is so overwhelming. And both of those states are a form of dissociation. If you're in your house and your kitchen is a disaster and you feel overwhelmed, you just start frantically cleaning. The reason we are frantically cleaning is because we're so uncomfortable with what we're feeling, all this energy, that we have to discharge it and get rid of it. Or you might see your kitchen a total disaster and you might just totally collapse and feel hunched over and just feel like, oh, this is so hopeless. I'm not going to do anything. I'm going back to bed. I'm going to dissociate that way.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm unpacking here in Idaho, and I just set in it just to not be overwhelmed, like 2 or 3 boxes a day, which is doable for my nervous system. It's just like, that's easy enough,
Yeah, I love that so much, because we can only do what is within our toleration. And that's the biggest piece, is we have to start small. You cannot start too big, because your protective parts will come online and say, nope, I'm not doing that. It's too overwhelming. So like a project, for some people, if you go to start this project and you go sit at your computer and you're like, all of a sudden, I'm so tired. I don't think I can do anything. I can't even think. I need to go lay down now. I'm like exhausted. What's happening is your nervous system is showing up and saying, this is super overwhelming. I don't think we should do this. Bad idea. Abort the mission. We're stopping. We're not doing this. And so your nervous system kicks online to protect you, acting in service of survival. So what we have to do, if that happens, is start even smaller. So maybe, okay, I'm just going to think about what it would be like to go and sit at the computer, and maybe then think about what it might be like to start writing one word for this project. I'm not going to actually do anything. I'm just going to maybe just think about it just a little bit and just see what happens with that. And the nervous system goes, hey, wait a minute, something's going on here. And it's scanning for threat. And then it's like, oh, wait, oh no, it's fine. We can rest. We don't have to do anything about this. It's not dangerous. And then the next time you're like, okay, now I'm going to actually sit at my computer. I'm not going to actually do anything, but I'm just going to sit here for a couple of minutes and just see, what this is like. Maybe I'll just look at a different website. Maybe I'll pull up the website that I need for this project. And then your nervous system shows up and says, hey, wait a minute, this is dangerous. We shouldn't be doing that. Oh, no, it's not. It's fine. It's okay. Never mind. You can rest, everybody. And the nervous system is so interesting like that because it'll show up, but we're not conscious of it. We're not paying attention. And we don't have to know why it feels threatening to our nervous system. All we have to do is understand, oh, this feels threatening to my nervous system, or it feels like too much to my nervous system. It feels activating or dysregulating in some way, and that's okay. We often attach shame or meaning like, oh, I'm stupid and that's why I can't do this, or there's something wrong with me and that's why I can't do this. And that's not true at all. Our nervous system is always, always, always acting in service of survival. It loves us so much and wants us to be protected so much that it will do anything at all costs to make sure that that happens. And it's always scanning that catalog of our experiences that have happened all the times before that have felt threatening. And it's constantly scanning that catalog. It's constantly scanning our environment, noticing if there's a threatening thing in our environment to try to protect us and try to keep us safe.
That was great. This is a really good one. Is it possible to heal in the same space that you were traumatized in?
That is such a good question and so dear to my heart because of what we experienced with mold and then what we experienced with my daughter's accident, having the accident happen right on our street. And yes and no. It's like if you're in a really toxic and abusive relationship, it's going to be a lot harder to heal than if you leave the toxic and abusive relationship and start over. The problem is the nervous system often will think if I leave, it's going to be more dangerous. It's going to be more harmful, depending on the threat, or it feels too overwhelming to leave. There's like challenges there with leaving. So it depends. It's like contextual, kind of like what we talked about earlier. So is it possible? Yes, it could be, but it also depends on what is the toxic environment or experience that you are living in. If you're constantly being exposed to mold in a house that you're living in and you are in a toxic abusive relationship and you're eating really bad food, you're probably going to have to make a decent amount of changes there to really make change in your nervous system and heal your body and get to feeling better. And sometimes it's better to like rip the Band-Aid and just to do all the big changes at once. But other times it might be really overwhelming to the nervous system to doing that if we did that, and it could push us even further into a protective pattern. So again, that's really a hard question to answer because it would depend on the individual experience and the relationship and the, toxicities in the environment and our own unique nervous system and how we are showing up in our nervous system, how our nervous system is experiencing all of that.
What's the best protocol for years of cocaine and ecstasy abuse?
Well, this is an interesting question. From a nervous system perspective, a person who is really into uppers may be a nervous system that is in more of a dorsal collapsed state. And so first, I would just be curious about what is your nervous system state? Like how is your nervous system being experienced? Do you tend to have more energy? Do you tend not to? Do you tend to be in a freeze state? So maybe you're in a combination of sympathetic mobilization energy, but you are covered with this cloak of immobilization of dorsal. And so a freeze state is a really interesting blended state where we have all this energy, but we can't do anything. We feel stuck. And this usually stems from early childhood trauma when we're in this freeze state, or it can be later childhood trauma. But very often kiddos will resort to a freeze state because they can't flee and they can't fight. Neither of those would be safe enough. So they have to freeze. And So I would just start to be really curious first, bringing awareness of how is my nervous system behaving? What are the states that I most often find myself in? What kinds of thoughts am I having in this state? And then start to experiment with practicing different things. So if you're in a more dorsal vagal state, then you're going to want to bring more mobilization into the nervous system. If you're in a freeze state, you're going to want to experiment with some more mobilization. And again, doing so in a titrated, slow and gentle and easy way with the nervous system. Less is always more. And maybe not always, because I said sometimes ripping the Band-Aid when you're in that like really crazy toxic environment. But generally speaking, less is more with the nervous system, and going at a slow pace so that you can overcome the dysregulation that you're in, but also doing it in a way that doesn't stress your nervous system out. And just start kind of toying around with that awareness. And that's kind of what will help to change. As far as the physical aspect of healing the brain and the nervous system, that's a whole other topic for a different podcast show, probably.
CLF protocol.
Totally.
That's great. My friend Grow Sanctuary, I had him on the podcast. He asked this question: how to heal the vagus nerve? I know it's kind of a broad one. They have like vagus nerve stimulators, right? I think I have one laying around.
Yeah. A lot of what I've talked about in this show actually does heal the vagus nerve, because the vagus nerve is connected to that ventral vagal complex, but also the dorsal vagal complex. And so starting with awareness, paying attention to our patterns. When we're with people, noticing, do I feel mobilized? Do I feel safe? Do I feel collapsed and shut down and distant? Noticing, what is it about this experience with this person? Because it's not the person's fault that we feel that way, and not that we need to subject ourselves to discomfort, but being curious. What is it about this experience that I'm feeling this way? Is it because this person has a harsh tone? Is it because, or maybe they're really welcoming and friendly and that feels safe or unsafe to my nervous system? So just starting with the awareness and being curious about how our nervous system, how we're experiencing our nervous system and our nervous system states, and then practicing some of those regulation tools. There's like so much other stuff that we could dive into, but for now, I'll just keep it really simple. If you're beginning on this nervous system journey, the awareness is really the foundational piece, because without the awareness, you don't know that there's something that needs to be changed, or how to even change it or affect change. I love that.
That's awesome. Yeah, I don't go to many parties, but I remember I was at one last year, and it was, an Idaho party, which is interesting, like almost like a farm homestead. And I was smoking cigars around a fire with some guys, and great conversation. Then near the end of the night, I was talking to this guy about health, and it was just talking to a brick wall about, how I don't recommend vitamin D. And I felt just like this huge resistance, and like I was wasting my time. And yeah, definitely. I think I'm pretty aware of when I'm shifting to these states. Like, I got to get the heck out of here because I'm completely wasting my time and my energy with this person.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's so huge and so important to know about. It's like critical, and sometimes being curious too, if you're a person that has this pattern of like, I want to get my point across, because sometimes we have this inner experience of, I want to be seen, I want to be known, I want to be heard, I want this person to hear me, not even for the person to agree, but I just want this person to get what I'm saying, and noticing those patterns too, like, oh, that's really interesting that this is showing up. In trauma, our prefrontal cortex, the frontal lobe of our brain, it goes offline, and our brainstem, the limbic system. So if you put your hand at the base of your neck and then go up to where that kind of the back of your skull sticks out a little bit, that's where your brainstem is. And that is where all of these responses live. And like, that's where the trauma memories are stored too, in that part of the brain, the implicit memory. And then if you put your hands over your forehead, this is the prefrontal cortex, the frontal lobe. And this is where our thinking brain is. This is where we can have rational thoughts and executive function, but all of that goes offline when we're in our primitive, that reptilian brain, the brainstem. And it's really good to know that, because when we're in those thoughts of like blaming another person or blaming ourselves, or these sympathetic thoughts that we might have, or the dorsal vagal thoughts that we might have, it's really helpful to notice that and know that about ourselves, because then we can try to invite curiosity in, because curiosity turns the frontal lobe back on. And then we can be more open to what's happening. If your child is screaming and they're having a tantrum on the floor and you notice yourself being really activated by that, you might invite yourself to be curious about the experience. Like, wow, my kid is screaming right now and I feel enraged. I can't even believe this anger that I'm feeling, or this fear, or this frustration, whatever the feeling is. And allowing yourself to be curious about it, that really can help influence change in the nervous system. Because instead of reacting, there's a moment of pause where we can really notice, wow, this is very interesting. I can't believe I'm having this huge reaction to my child just being upset that I'm not giving them whatever they want. Or like in an experience like that, Matt, where you're talking to someone and they're really not getting what you're saying, and you might feel like, okay, I need to leave, or I need to like really drill this point home, noticing, oh man, that's really interesting that I'm feeling that way. And maybe it's the right response. I'm not suggesting, that it's wrong in any way, but just to be curious.
Yeah, I like that. You made me think I've been listening to old Adam Bergstrom interviews on Extreme Health Radio, and where he said the place in the brainstem where memories are stored. I was trying to remember the name of the spot, but it's called the assassin point. Like, you can shoot someone there, and it's the only spot in the brain where if you target that spot, they can't even scream. And Adam Bergstrom says because there's no time there, like the timeless point in the brain. I wonder if that's this. It seems like the same area right around that region.
Yeah. The brainstem is a very, 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 all of the brain is very important, but that part of the brain is very important. And it's where your, like the spine meets the back of the skull. So there's a reason that it's like inside all those bones being protected.
Interesting. Let me see. This is a good one. What are some good strategies to cope with an overactive nervous system from a traumatic brain injury? We also had a question on a concussion. I don't know if there's slightly different or the same.
Yeah, brain injury is another one that's near and dear to my heart because of my daughter's accident and the traumatic brain injury that she experienced, but also my own experience with traumatic brain injury. I was in a car accident when I was 18 and was hit head on and had a traumatic brain injury from the accident. And so basically what happens with a brain injury is the brain becomes overwhelmed, and the body does too, because that's what makes things traumatic, right? Is things are happening too soon and too fast. So your body doesn't have enough time to prepare. And so with something like that, with a traumatic brain injury, there might be two components to it. One of it is the traumatic component where, you might have to work with a practitioner to sort of work through the trauma depending on what happened. And then the other part of it is the nourishment and supporting the actual physical brain. So like with Matt's CLF protocol, but also eating enough healthy fat. And I really love Nervine herbs for supporting the nervous system as well. Systemic enzymes can be really helpful, which is part of the CLF protocol too, can be super helpful for brain health and traumatic brain injuries. And so just supporting your body in its rhythms. So when we have a traumatic brain injury, sleep can be affected for a number of reasons, and anxiety levels. And so just doing things that help calm the brain. And honestly, even something as simple as taking your two hands with the palms of the base of the palms against the forehead can really offer support, because it's just a way of kind of cradling the head and allowing the brain to kind of cool off, noticing the sensation, or taking your whole hand across the forehead and just noticing the sensation of the hand against the forehead and allowing yourself to be present and see if you can really feel that support. And so taking time to allow yourself to feel comfortable with stillness and slowness once again, which after a traumatic injury or traumatic accident or something, or even just any kind of trauma, can feel really scary and overwhelming to the nervous system. So even starting with like 10 seconds and working your way up to 30 seconds and working your way up to a minute, and then a few minutes of just being with yourself and noticing sensations and allowing yourself to slow down. I have a friend on Instagram, Samantha Naturally, and she has been doing this practice of laying on the floor and doing nothing. And I just think that that is such a great practice where you literally just do nothing. And the support of the hard floor is different from the bed. And the reason for that is because the floor is offering this feedback where you can feel the difference. You can feel all the points where your body is touching the floor. Whereas when you're on a bed, you don't have that same kind of feedback because it's all sort of enmeshed. The bed kind of cradles you differently, whereas the floor, you're laying on the floor and you feel supported by the floor. You feel held by the floor, and you can feel all the different points of contact from your body against the floor, which is really helpful. You can feel the spaces and you can feel the places where your body is actually touching the floor. So getting in touch with those different sensations can be really helpful in slowing the nervous system down.
I have to get back to that. My college days, I was in musical theater for a few years, and my teacher had us all do that corpse pose on the floor. And I remember that was my favorite time of the day, and she would guide us through this guided meditation of, feel your toes relaxing or whatever, and she would go up the body, then your knees, and she would just go up till you reach your head, and just total state of relaxation. And I felt it every time. I would just like melt into the floor. It's amazing.
That is so awesome that she offered that to you. I mean, that is really, really, really cool. I love that. I feel like that should be in all schools. All kids should be guided through a practice like that. It's just so powerful, and it gives kids permission to be still in a safe way.
And you had me Google, you had me look up Nervine, or I never heard that term. And it says Nervines are herbs that specifically help support the nervous system. So the ones you mentioned before, like skullcap and passion flower and hops, and I think I have a tea with all those things. I was on a heavy chamomile kick a few years ago, making chamomile tea every night, and that felt pretty good.
Yeah, I love chamomile tea, and chamomile tea is really good for digestion too. A lot of the homeopathic chamomilla is actually derived from chamomile, and it's for babies for teething, and it helps with teething pain, but it also helps with digestive upset that babies experience from all the excess saliva. So it helps calm the nervous system, and it helps with the digestive system. I love herbs so much. I was an herbalist first before I did any of this stuff. And when you get to know plants and you go places, you have friends everywhere. I'm always so excited when I travel, and I'm like, oh my God, I know this plant. This is so cool.
Well, I'm gonna have to pick your brain when I start my geodesic dome, because I definitely want to grow some herbs in there. I think a lot of them are easy to grow, like weeds. So.
Yeah, a lot of them are, and that's why they're so cool. Like yarrow, I don't know why, but I just have such an affinity for yarrow. It's like this adorably feathery leaf that to me is just such, like when I see it, it's such a cue of safety. And it's just like such a sweet little plant. And it has a lot of nutritional and supportive components too that I can't remember at this moment, but it's just such a great plant. I love it so much.
Yeah, there's some of that growing up here. And I need to get back on chaga. That one feels so supportive. My friend Justin, he used that as the base for his coffee. I think that's a good idea if you're going to do the French press or something. The chaga tea for that. But we had a lot of questions, Mandy, like where do I start? Like that was like probably a quarter of the questions that people sent in. Like I'm new to all this. And so you have a website, mandywellness.com, and you're almost done with a new program, right? Did I see that?
Yeah, I'm not sure when this episode will be released, but my program starts on February 2nd, and I will be launching it again in the fall and hopefully and definitely next year. I also have an e-course online that is more experiential. So I don't dive in super heavy on a little bit on the polyvagal stuff, but it's much more experiential with inner child work and stuff like that. The group program is going to be pretty heavy on the educational piece of the attachment theory and the nervous system and boundaries and inner child work, but also a lot of experiential exercises too. And of course, the co-regulation component with a group.
That's really cool. I think this is better than any college course people can take. So I recommend people check it out. Hard to learn this stuff in school, right?
Totally.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you sharing your wisdom. And as I said, I'm sure I'll have you back on the show because you're like me. You keep researching and, you don't say this is it. You keep building on what you know or you think you know, right?
Yeah. It's like what we talked about earlier, where it's like the more I learn, the more I realize I don't know anything.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, I know Adam Bergstrom's, he's so contrary to, the mainstream, but I think he said there's 4 branches of the nervous system. And I always forget the 4th one that he talks about. But have you heard that theory of there's more than 3?
I have not, but I'm totally open to, I would love to hear what he says about it. He's a very interesting character. Yeah. I've heard what I've been taught is there's the ventral, sympathetic, and dorsal, and then there's the blended states. So there's the 3 main branches, and then there's blends. So we didn't really get into the blended states, but the blended state of play is sympathetic, where you have that energy, but you also have safety of ventral. And the reason why that's important in play is for a lot of people, play is spontaneous, but for some nervous systems, that spontaneity can feel threatening. And also, depending on the state of your vagal brake, play can really easily turn into fighting, which is why sometimes you'll see kids like at recess playing and then all of a sudden it turns into a fist fight and you're like, what the hell happened? Like these kids were like getting along fine and now all of a sudden they're punching each other in the face. And it's because of that activation of the mobilization system where you have enough safety on board. And then if your vagal brake opens up just a little too much, then you're all the way into the sympathetic mobilization response and you're seeing things through that filter of mobilization. So play can be a really interesting area for a lot of nervous systems and may not feel safe for a lot of nervous systems to access. And then there's the state of stillness, which we talked a little bit about, and that is a blend of ventral and dorsal. And so these 2 states are not self-protection. These states are, you feel safe enough to be still. You feel safe enough to be calm and at peace and at ease. You feel safe enough to nurse your baby. You're safe and restful enough to sit quietly, and fall asleep. And then there's the last state of freeze, which is a blend of sympathetic mobilization and dorsal vagal immobilization. So you have these two opposing forces inside of your system saying, I have to, but I can't. I have to do something and I don't know what to do and I can't do anything. So that's what I've learned.
That's awesome. Well, I appreciate it. And I think hopefully people were taking notes for all this stuff. I have a good amount here. It's always fun connecting dots.
Yeah, totally.
And so you're on Instagram, it's Heal with Mandy, right? And then mandywellness.com. Are those the main two avenues?
Yes. Yeah, that's pretty much where I'm at.
Right on. Well, yeah, thanks so much. And I think this will go live right before your course releases, pretty sure.
Oh, awesome.
So either right before or right after, one of the two. So
Great. Well, thank you so much, Matt. It was so great to be back on the show. Thank you for being interested in the nervous system and for trusting me. It's an honor to be back. So thanks.
It's always a blast. All right. Thanks, Mandy. I'll stick around as I close out the show. Well, I hoped you learned something about the nervous system. I really like that Mandy pointed out that the goal is not to be in ventral constantly, which is known as parasympathetic. Because I see that meme put out there a lot, that we always want to be parasympathetic and that coffee's bad because cortisol's the devil and cortisol is associated with the sympathetic state, which we don't want to be in. But I like that she said it's about shifting between all of them and not being stuck in any one. I thought it was fascinating that she said you can co-regulate with a tree or sunlight. That's pretty cool. And I've actually felt that. When I got really heavy into studying light about 4 or 5 years ago, I remember really tuning into the sunshine, and it really felt like a hug from a human being. It was that tangible. And I think that's why it's so addicting. And, there's a lot of theories of why that is, the beta endorphin, and there's a lot going on, definitely more than we know. It's not just a serosteroid hormone D story. I also liked what she said about meditation and how zero stimulus meditation, like I did for several years, which was the less sensory input, the better. And it's really interesting to know that can actually be harmful for some people, as she mentioned. I'm not saying that sensory deprivation flotation therapy is harmful. I have my own unit, big fan of it. But once again, I think context is really important, and knowing when to do a passive float, which is no stimulus, versus an active float, which is when you would use music in there. And that could be helpful for people with really extreme PTSD, like veterans or something. Because as Mandy said, no stimulus can be too much for the nervous system. I like using New Calm in airplane mode. Well, I have to use airplane mode because my sensory deprivation room is fully EMF shielded. But I like that they have that option in New Calm. So I do airplane mode and usually a 40 to 50 minute session on the New Calm, and it feels amazing. And you get a huge download of magnesium, and it's still totally worth it to do floating, even with sound. And this is a really timely episode because since I recorded this with Mandy, I've been through the ringer. I got the COVID and I was skeptical like a lot of people are, and then they get it, and then they're extremely humbled. I've gotten so many messages about that. And just because you believe in it or believe it's real doesn't mean that you're pro jab or pro mandates or masks or all that other BS, because I am not. But it's definitely real, and I was floored, and I could barely walk the first day, and it was like nothing I'd ever experienced. And there's a lot of people gaslighting. I kind of want to have a show all about the subject of gaslighting because it's so important. And people do that when people get an illness, and it's really malicious. When you discount someone's experience, you're pretty much telling them that they're crazy and that what they experienced or saw is just in their head. And that's really a form of psychological warfare. So I think that's where Mandy's work comes in. You know, beyond nutrition, supplements, devices, all of which have their place. But I think to handle the trolls and the people in your life that are being vampiric in that way, you really need a strong immune system. And I think meditation is really amazing. A connection to source, however you do it, is really important to get super grounded so that you're untouchable. And to me, sugar really helps. I've been hitting the orange juice really hard. And I'll have a whole solo show on my journey. It was a total spiritual journey that I recently went through, and definitely affected my nervous system. Mandy just told me to rest, which was good advice. But I was resting and using hyperbaric and ozone therapy and 3 frequency devices and supplements, systemic enzymes, spore-based probiotics. And I think the nervous system awareness plays a huge role in healing from anything, acute or chronic. Mandy just launched a group coaching program that's 16 weeks. So I'll put the link below if you want to check that out. Her website is mandywellness.com, and her Instagram is Heal with Mandy. I just really love what she's doing, and I think that you should head over and support her work, even if it's just checking out her free material, which she has a lot of on social media. My website is matt-blackburn.com. Speaking of the nervous system, I recently put up their crystal singing bowls, which I've experienced over the years. When I lived in Southern California for 30 years, I frequented a lot of different apartments and houses and events, just countless. I would say 3 to 4 a week for several years. I just tried everything, meditations, guided meditations, past life regressions, psychic trainings, channelings, oneness blessings called dikshas, and sound baths. And the sound baths were pretty much my favorite thing because I would always feel it in my nervous system, super grounded feeling when I left those sessions. So I was able to find an affordable, which is the key word, because a lot of these are $1,600 for one bowl. So I found a whole set for under $2,000, which I think is a great deal. And I really feel them, especially the biggest one, which is like the root chakra one. That's by far my favorite. I just play that for 30 seconds, a minute, and my whole system is just taken down multiple notches instantly. It's so wild, the effect that these have on the body. And I think they're really targeting the nervous system. And then you could find the Mitolife products at mitolife.co. The Resiliency is going to be back in stock next week. So that's the start of February. The NAD Power niacinamide will be back any day now. And most people were asking about the Purely K, when that'll be back. Keep an eye out on my Instagram because I update on there. And we'll also send out emails if you're on the Mitolife email list. But the current ETA for the Purely K is by the end of February. You know, it's a super obscure ETA. I'll give a more accurate one as soon as I know. And exciting news, the magnesium is out. We had a short run on Wednesday, and we're going to have the big release on Friday. Should be when the show releases. A common question I've been getting is, does the Mag ATP, the new Mitolife magnesium product, does that replace magnesium bicarbonate? And short answer is no. But if for whatever reason you're not going to make the magnesium bicarbonate, or you're not going to take it, then the capsules are better than nothing. But I like doing both, and I personally do 3. So I do the homemade, which is key. I wouldn't buy magnesium bicarbonate. It's a waste of money. Make your own magnesium bicarbonate from magnesium hydroxide powder. It's not rocket science. There's YouTube videos all over the place. I have one on there. Charles Barber has one. Learn how to make that, and then take these capsules. I like it with espresso after breakfast. There's a synergy between these amino acid forms of magnesium, amino acid bound forms, with coffee, and you add panacea shilajit in there and niacinamide, and you're really flying. And then transdermal magnesium chloride or magnesium sulfate in the bath, or better, sensory deprivation floating once or twice a week, and you're really covered on magnesium. I used to be a purist in a lot of ways, especially with magnesium, just thinking that bicarbonate's the only one, it's the only natural form, everything else is a waste of time or unnatural or whatever. And I've completely changed my view on that in the last couple of years. I'm a big fan of these forms that I have, especially the taurate and the glycinate bound magnesium, because they work. And I've been using them for several years now, and I definitely feel it. And I really think it's that combo, it's that trio of the amino acid forms, the liquid bicarbonate, and then the transdermal chloride or sulfate. That's how you really raise your levels, because I don't think people are taking enough magnesium. They're just taking oxide or citrate, that calm product you find at CVS Pharmacy, which is horrible, super laxative, and just really harsh on the system. It blows up ceruloplasmin. So it's really about nuance with supplementation, and the forms matter. Lastly, check out Mitolife Academy. That's my private YouTube school. And this month's been wild. It's been a rough month, honestly, but I'm getting back on track, and I'll get the last 2 advanced videos out here at the buzzer this weekend if you're an Academy member. And then usually I have the live question and answer session the last day of the month. And that will definitely be the case this month. It's been wild. I have some stories to share. Right after I got back to Idaho, I think it was day 2, my buck jumped over his gate and started humping the doe that I didn't want him to hump all night and all morning, who knows how many hours. And if you have goats, you know that there's a rotation with breeding and mating and, having kids and then getting the does and milk. And that cycle got all screwed up that day. So super bummed. In a way, it was kind of funny, but it super stressed me out and probably weakened my nervous system to make me susceptible to COVID. Who knows? But I've had some stressful days up here, and being fully off grid is definitely not for the faint of heart. You need thick skin, and you need a robust nervous system. And I think coffee, magnesium, shilajit, sugar definitely help. Highly recommend fresh squeezed orange juice if you're feeling a little overwhelmed. I think a lot of people are in these times. I've been hitting at least a quart a day, and I'm probably going to bump that up to 2 quarts a day and see how I feel. But so far, being back on the OJ, I feel so much more resilient, so much more grounded. So I'll see you guys next Friday. Stay supercharged.